Right to Life Radio with John Gerardi on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400, a production of the Right to Life of Central California. And now, here's your host, John Gerardi.
We've got a local story that touches on one of the big questions we always get relating to the abortion issue, as well as national stuff to cover the Biden budget and the massive proposed expansion for abortion funding in the Biden budget. You're listening to Right to Life Radio right here on Power Talk 96.7 AM 1400. John Gerardi and Jonathan Keller rejoining us again, gloriously returning.
Yes.
Welcome back, Jonathan.
I am burdened with glorious purpose to be here. And I say that in honor of Loki, the new series dropping on Marvel Disney Plus, streaming today.
just you literally just went to a conference about like corporate wokeness and stuff like that, and here you are shilling for Disney within 10 seconds of the show beginning. Anyway,
it's what I do.
It is what you do.
As I sit here on my Apple computer.
Yeah, I know you've got with your mandatory four Apple devices on the desk at any one time.
You know, John,
I've got a bunch of junk on the desk.
I was looking at my Twitter profile. It was either Twitter or something else, and it was just something that I set up kind of humorously, and I said, hey, you know, what's some like fun silly stuff, because you don't want to be all about politics and everything all the time.
Sure.
So I checked my Twitter bio the other day, and I literally have in there big fan of Marvel, Apple, Costco.
Like how much of the Fortune 500 can you promote?
And I mean,
some of these people should be paying you.
I hate to say it, John, but I am kind of like a corporate marketer's, best dream.
Oh yeah,
But
you're the guy who gets every new iPhone the second it comes out. So,
anyway, folks, you should not do that. Instead, we should talk about the craziness happening. I'm actually excited about this first story, John, because I don't think maybe excited is not the right
probably
word.
The wrong word, but it's interesting, and it touches on some really important abortion questions that we get all the time.
Yes.
So,
out of California, correct?
Out of Fresno. A jury in Fresno has decided to convict, and it took the jury 52 minutes, convict a man, 24-year-old man, of a murder charge. Now, this is not a normal murder charge, okay? California has this weird provision within its criminal law that, okay, Jonathan, let's suppose that you have a DUI. Then let's suppose you have a second DUI during which you kill somebody. Okay.
That would seem to be a very serious offense.
It's very, very serious. And in California, in fact, it's so serious that this is almost kind of a unique feature of California criminal law. When you kill someone in a second or third or whatever, driving under the influence event, you can be charged with second-degree murder. This is a weird, odd quirk of California criminal law. And this is a case in which the person who died was not an adult. The person who died was an unborn child. So this is a 42-year-old woman who, this was back in August, I believe, of 2020. She was driving home from an OB appointment with her, when she was 6 months pregnant with a girl whom she had already given a name to, Melanie. And she was killed by a guy who was driving under the influence. This guy was a multiple time felon. He had smoked meth that morning, crashed into her car, killed her. He's going to get 18 years to life in prison as a result of this. Now, he's getting charged with murder. He is genuinely getting charged. He was charged and convicted by a jury of his peers, convicted of murder. And again, this is this California criminal scheme, this criminal law feature of California where, again, if it's your second time doing a DUI and you kill someone, you can be charged with murder. Now, I don't want to dwell too much on this dude who clearly is a bad guy and is involved in all kinds of bad stuff. He was fleeing. He actually fled. He was fleeing police as he, this was the incident that prompted him to run into this woman, because he was fleeing police and smashed into this poor woman's car. And she herself has had horrible injuries. She's had something like 22 surgeries since the car accident, which is absurd.
Wow.
And has had horrible pain and lost her baby. So obviously this is a terrible guy. But what we're looking at is this bizarre feature of California law that if you engage in an act of homicide, basically, if you engage in some kind of violent act that results in the death of a child, you can be charged with murder. And this is something that is constantly asked of me as Mr. Pro-Life. So it's weird when you're the director of Right to Life of Central California, you somehow become Mr. Pro-Life, and people will randomly come up to you and ask you questions about different pro-life topics. And one of the most consistently asked questions we get is, well, how is it that in California you can be charged with double murder if you murder a pregnant woman? How is it that in California you can be charged with an act of homicide for killing an unborn child? And there's no good answer to it. And how is that consistent with our law regarding abortion? So,
John, is this kind of what we call? Because I know we've talked about this on the show before, but for people who don't remember, there's this phrase, the abortion distortion.
The abortion distortion.
The idea that literally it's not just that we have, we have these abortion policy, or the way we treat children before birth is one way, and the way we treat children before birth is a different way. It's literally that abortion itself, Roe v. Wade and then Planned Parenthood v. Casey, it essentially has created this complete weird carve-out, this weird distortion that forces us to act in ways that in any other context
just don't make sense. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So it's like we have this huge exception to homicide laws, this huge exception to murder laws when it involves a doctor, killing an unborn child. Even the California criminal statutes that allow for homicide prosecutions for killing an unborn child, they have to have an explicit carve-out for abortion. They have to explicitly say this does not impact a doctor who performs an abortion.
Well, and really, John, it's one of the very few cases that I can think of. I mean, you're the attorney, obviously, but it's one of the very few cases that I can think of where literally we say the way in which this particular crime is committed is almost entirely dependent on the intent.
Well, it's dependent on the intent. It's almost more dependent. So this is the concept within medical ethics, and it's similar within how we treat unborn children in the criminal context. Okay. Within medical ethics, you have to sometimes ask the question when you're dealing with a fetus who has medical needs. You have to discern the question, who is the patient? Okay, that's often a difficult question and a necessary question to ask. Who is the patient here? Is the mother the patient, or is the child the patient, the unborn child? And when do you consider an unborn child a patient versus when do you consider an unborn child not a patient? Or as treat the unborn child as really as something inanimate, as not a patient, as not a kind of rights holder, as not a proper object, a person who is a proper object of medical care? That's a very difficult question, and unfortunately the way that the dominant answer within the medical ethical community, which is predominantly accepting of abortion, the only way they can make that circle square is to say, well, an unborn child is a patient when the mother wants the child to be a patient. And so the humanity, ultimately, and dignity of that unborn child hinges on the mother's will. It hinges on the mother's decision. Whether or not this child has value is ultimately a function of her choice. This human being's life has value or doesn't have value based on someone else's choice.
Yes.
And it's not the first time in American legal or ethical contexts where a person's humanity hinged on the choice of a more powerful person.
Yep.
If the slave owner decided, you know what, I'm going to set all of these people free who work and live on my land, whom I technically own, all of a sudden they have a whole bunch of different kinds of higher legal rights. They, blah, blah, blah. The slavery comparisons are kind of hard to avoid here. And ultimately, that distinction of is this child a wanted child or not, that is ultimately determinative in California criminal law. That this woman who suffered this horrible thing, that this, methed out loser fleeing police crashes his car into her, and her child winds up dying as a result, and she has horrible injuries. This guy's going to jail. This guy's going to the big house for a long time. He is convicted of murder. But if that same woman, and it seems like this woman loved this child and wanted to keep this child, she had named the child. She apparently knew that she was 6 months pregnant. She apparently knew that it was a girl. She had named the girl Melanie.
Heartbreaking.
It's totally heartbreaking. If she had not wanted the child, and instead of a methed out loser, she got a loser with a medical degree to perform an abortion, it changes the whole legal context of it. It changes, for many people, the whole ethical context of it. And it all hinges on the individual desire of that woman. And so in a sense, California's law is consistent with that ethic, but that ethic is itself inherently inconsistent, inherently irrational. You're basically just saying that human life is not equal. You're saying that human life only has value when other more powerful people decide it does or does not. And that's the horrible thing of it. I mean, usually when people ask me, like, how can this be? How can we have legalized abortion in California and yet you can, prosecute someone for murder if they kill an unborn child? And usually what I say is, well, look, California law is inconsistent and irrational and it doesn't make sense. Which is true.
Yes.
But in a broader sense, it is actually consistent. It's consistent with a very inconsistent ethic. It's consistent with an ethic that basically says, no, what matters is power. What matters is if those with power, in some sense, say that you have value, then you have value.
So, John, now I actually can chime in because this goes to not the most recent conference I was at, but the one I was at about 3 weeks ago. I heard,
racking these conferences up. Jeez Louise.
I heard a phenomenal presentation. They're actually going to release it, I think, later this week, later this month. And if possible, we should maybe discuss it, post the video when it comes out. But your old law professor, Carter Sneed, spoke at this conference.
Right.
And he was talking kind of generally about his great book that he just wrote a couple months ago, What It Means to Be Human. But he had this phenomenal phrase. He did a PowerPoint, and it was just like,
yeah.
I mean, it was like drinking from a fire hose. He just had bullet points like all over. But there was this one scene that really stuck out that was phenomenal. And it showed these two knights, like, old
medieval
knights wearing armor with swords, and they were fighting each other.
Yeah.
And he said the problem with a lot of the discussion that we have today, whether you're talking, especially if you're talking about abortion, it applies to other things as well, but especially on abortion. He said you essentially have you don't have people anymore. You don't talk about duties and obligations to one another and community, but you have these individuals, and even the individuals themselves. You don't talk about their bodies and what their bodies mean, what their bodies are for, but they are atomized wills clad in the armor of rights.
Right.
And they go to battle against each other.
And like, to such an extent that we refuse to acknowledge, hey, maybe there's some natural bonds and duties and obligations that exist between a mother and a child. Maybe there are obvious duties and bonds and obligations that exist between a state and the poor. Maybe there are duties and bonds and obligations that exist in all of these different kinds, between a father, God forbid, and his children.
Well, and the example, he kind of briefly references this, but there's a famous pro-choice analogy called the violinist.
Yeah, the violinist. So you wake up and you find yourself connected to a violinist. If you sever the connection between you and the violinist dies. And the argument is, well, women find themselves unexpectedly pregnant. Aren't they legitimately allowed to disconnect themselves from this child in the same way that you would be if you found yourself connected to a violinist? And the key argument is, well, the violinist is a stranger. There's a greater, and I don't know why it was a violinist, but anyway, this person is a total stranger to you. A woman and her unborn child, there's something natural about that relationship. These are not two strangers.
Yes.
There's something natural about that relationship, and as well as the relationship between all of us in a community to help support women who are in that kind of a situation. So, at any rate, this story from the Fresno Bee earlier this week, it's really illustrative of the problem we have in California and throughout this country as far as how we think about people and how we think about abortion laws. When we return, we're going to talk a little bit more about Carter Sneed's book, since Jonathan brought it up, What It Means to Be Human, the case for the body in human bioethics, and why it's such an important book for all of us in the pro-life movement. That's next right here on Right to Life Radio on Power Talk 96.7 AM 1400. This is the Ronettes. That wall of sound brought to you by Phil Spector. Phil Spector, rest in peace. Passed away last year during COVID from his jail cell. It's always awkward playing a Phil Spector song, even though I love all of his music so much. Anyway, Right to Life Radio. Thank you all so much for listening. All right, so in the last segment we brought up, and I want to spend a little bit of time talking about it a bit more here on Right to Life Radio. I'm assuming this book is actually still in Jonathan's car after I loaned it to him.
It is. No. I brought it inside. I actually did get a copy finally as well.
Oh,
so
you
I need to bring you back.
You need to
copy,
give me my copy back.
I was going to try to get it signed for you, but I could not. I could not track Dr. Sneed down.
That's all right. Anyway, the book in question is called "What It Means to Be Human," and it's written by Professor Carter Sneed, who's a professor at Notre Dame Law School. And one of my old professors there. I read this book, and I think it's maybe the best book on the pro-life issue to have been written in a really long time. I think a lot of pro-life books are, not that they're badly written, but they're not exactly super seriously written, and often this is a cash grab for a pro-life speaker to continue to promote him or herself, and it's not exactly saying anything particularly profound other than abortion is bad.
And John, to be fair, there are a lot of people, I put this delicately, politely, there are a lot of people that both listen to the show and the friends of people that listen to the show that are maybe like just getting into the pro-life issue.
Yes.
And a lot of those books serve as great kind of jumping off points.
That's fair. That's fair.
Entry-level discussions of, hey,
Sure.
These are some inspiring stories about what happens that the pro-life movement is doing, and here's ways you can get involved.
Anyway.
But when you want to get down to the next...
Jonathan's doing the necessary work to try to not offend people. I'm willing to say, anyway. So...
but once you're ready for some meat...
Anyway. What Professor Sneed does is basically try to make these kind of fundamental arguments about why we would oppose abortion which are rooted in, I guess, the broader Christian philosophical tradition, but which are making arguments that aren't explicitly be pro-life because the Bible tells you so. His chief contention throughout is that we have embraced a kind of philosophical outlook called expressive individualism, that human beings have value insofar as they can realize various kinds of mental faculties, various kinds of mental acts of self-awareness, self-projection, self-fulfillment, realizing the fulfillment of hopes, dreams, and aspirations in all of these ways that, and basically that's how we define humanity, in these ways that are really much more characteristic of healthy, strong, mentally capable of adults, and not characteristic of toddlers, of the very elderly, of those who have suffered from some kind of mental or physical handicap, like people with Down syndrome, people in comas, the unborn, people with Alzheimer's. Basically, what he's saying is that our way of thinking about what makes human beings valuable is fundamentally unequal for different kinds of human persons, and rooted in a kind of ableism that insofar as you have better, higher functioning capacities, that you can achieve your dreams, that you can visualize your dreams, then you are a rights-bearing member of the community. And insofar as you don't have those capacities, you are less and less and less a part of that community. The unborn child gets excluded in this calculus. Some philosophers like Peter Singer would exclude even children up through the age of... How long is the trial period that Peter Singer says you should have for a
30
kid?
days, usually.
I thought it was... No. It was way more than that.
Was it
Wasn't
a year?
I thought it was like a year.
Yeah.
Peter Singer was like a bioethicist, which shows you how meaningless that term is. Basically thinks you should have a trial period with your baby, where within a certain number of months after the baby's born, you should be allowed to kill it because it's not really a valuable member of society yet.
John, does he talk about in the book, because I cannot remember if it was him or one of the other speakers at this conference that talked about, in contrast to what you said about the fact that we get, we view everybody as perfect, and then anybody who's not perfect gets this.
Is lesser than.
Yeah, one of the speakers mentioned that we actually all exist on a spectrum of disability.
That was one of his big lines. So the line that Professor Sneed uses is that all human beings exist on a kind of spectrum of disability.
Like a bell curve, basically.
Yeah, and that what characterizes us as humans is this weakness that comes about from being in a body. So when we are conceived, we are utterly dependent on our mothers. When we are first born, we are dependent on our parents. As we get older, we become less and less dependent on them. In our adult strength, we aren't as dependent on them, but we start to have other people who depend on us. We become the caretakers for other people, and this is not an unnatural imposition. This is a natural part of living and being a human and reproducing and having parents. When we become adults and are in our period of strength, of mental strength and physical strength, we have to care for children. We have to care for elderly loved ones. We have to care for friends. We have obligations to society. And these are not unnatural bonds like the violinist that we find ourselves hooked up to. These are natural. These spring from our nature as people with bodies. And so much of our abortion law in the United States is informed by this attitude that, why should I, the unborn child and the mother are total strangers to each other. Why should the mother be forced to care for her child? Why should people be forced to help out mothers? Why, this, what Professor Sneed calls an atomization of culture. Everyone is just a little island unto themselves. So it's such an important book. It gives a great history with abortion, with assistive reproductive technologies, and with the assisted suicide issue, this extensive journey through American history on all of those issues and how these philosophical mistakes have informed American law. It's a great book. Again, What It Means to Be Human, The Case for the Body in Public Bioethics. A really, really important book, and it gets the John Gerardi seal of approval. 4 stars. 4 stars out of 4 from John Gerardi.
And it'll get that from me once I actually read it.
Once you actually read it. There you go. All right, when we return, we're going to talk a little bit about the Biden budget and other issues. Joe Biden trying to fund abortion without any kind of federal restrictions. That's next on Right to Life Radio on Power Talk. This is Darlene Love. So many great songs about bobbies. Thank you all so much for listening to Right to Life Radio. The best bumper music in the greater Fresno area radio market, and some would say even the whole world. Right to Life Radio. Thank you all so much.
Many people
for
are
listening.
saying.
Many people are saying.
The best root music.
The best music, the greatest music. It's unbelievable. It's incredible, really. Many people are saying it.
Anyway, etc. I do a bad Joe Biden. That's not Joe Biden. Shoot, that's a bad Donald Trump. I need more coffee. Sorry. All right, everybody. So
It's a really bad Joe Biden.
it's a really bad Joe Biden. What? The best Joe Biden is to be obviously looking at a teleprompter and squinting at the teleprompter and say, the thing from the guy. All right. It was funny seeing the president board Air Force One the other day and had to flip a cicada off of his neck. Anyway, so
I have to say, John, just you and I have not been to D.C. in a while, and I am.
I went there.
Oh, well, that's true. When did you go?
I went in February.
Oh, you lucky bum.
Anyway.
I'm bummed that we're missing out on all the cicada craziness because all my DC friends are like, it is truly like almost biblical proportions of
It
cicadas.
sounds gross. Why would you want to? Why wouldn't you want to miss out on that? That sounds like the perfect thing to miss out on.
I don't know.
It's probably so gross in DC right now. Between it's June, so people call DC the swamp. Well, Donald Trump calls DC the swamp. It genuinely is a swamp. Like that's literally they built the District of Columbia basically on top of a big swamp, and so it's incredibly humid. It's you have to walk around in a suit usually. So
that is gross. I grant
the
that
suit,
to you.
This is my minority viewpoint that I think the suit and tie is like the worst possible idea as far as it doesn't actually work for almost any season. In the summertime, it's way too hot. In the wintertime, it's not warm enough. And in DC in the summertime, having to wear a suit is murder. So, yeah, there you go. It's probably disgustingly hot, disgustingly humid, and there are a bunch of gross bugs
Flying all over the
place and molting their skin.
It's just
Jonathan just loves DC, folks. That's the only thing to it. He wants to go to DC and be a huge political nerd.
Well,
All right.
and it's the every 17 years aspect of it that is appealing to me. It's like, hey, you won't get to experience this again until I'm 55. I mean, come on.
Right to Life Radio. Apparently, we're interested in bugs. All right, Jonathan. Speaking of DC, speaking of the swamp,
Oh, yes.
Mr. Biden has has introduced his proposed budget to Congress, and this is a historic budget in the sense that it does not contain any Hyde Amendment language. The Hyde Amendment is the rider that gets attached to the federal budget every single year, and basically what it does is it prevents federal dollars from directly funding abortion. Now, Planned Parenthood and other entities get a whole bunch of other government funding for non-abortion services, but abortion itself does not get funded directly by the federal government except in cases of rape or incest. Because the Hyde Amendment has been in place in every federal budget since 1976, this has probably resulted in at least 2 million abortions not happening that would otherwise have happened if you just look at basically the economic incentives of if something is made free and subsidized by the government, people take advantage of it more often.
And you don't have to take our word for it. Look at the great studies of our friend Dr. Michael New.
Exactly.
Charlotte Lozier Institute.
Yeah, so he's a scholar with Charlotte Lozier Institute and a business school professor at the Catholic University of America. So this is a kind of a historic thing that Biden is doing this. It isn't as interesting or as exciting for some people because the federal budget sounds boring. This is also an enormous federal budget. It's a $6 trillion federal budget, which is almost like funny money. I mean, it's like I don't think we can even fathom like 100 bazillion gajillion dollars. Anyway, it's important to remember just how this will impact Planned Parenthood. I think that's a really important thing because in spite of the Trump administration efforts to defund Planned Parenthood, all of that work that was done to try to defund Planned Parenthood is basically for naught. So I want to go through the sort of timeline of funding for Planned Parenthood and what the Trump administration tried to do, failed to do, accomplished, and is no longer going to be able to do. So let's go through this, shall we? In 2017, Republicans tried to repeal Obamacare. As part of repealing Obamacare, they are trying to defund Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood gets something over $450 million a year. Most of it, actually, Planned Parenthood gets about $500 million a year. The vast bulk of it is from Medicaid. Okay, so every state has a Medicaid program. Medicaid is health insurance for lower income persons who are under a certain income threshold. If you're under a certain income threshold, you qualify for Medicaid. California's Medicaid program is Medi-Cal. Every state has their own program. All right. So Planned Parenthood gets something like $450 million a year from Medicaid. Republicans try to pass a thing to prevent that funding. And what happens? Instead of overturning Obamacare, instead of defunding all of the different health insurance plans that cover abortion through Obamacare, instead of defunding Planned Parenthood, what happens? John McCain happens. John McCain in the Senate basically denies Republicans the 50 votes they need, along with Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, and the effort to so the 52 Republican senators, they lose 3 of them. That's only 49. So they cannot repeal Obamacare. They cannot defund Planned Parenthood. Then the Trump administration succeeds. They cut off Planned Parenthood funding through Title X. The Title X program is a federal family planning program established under Richard Nixon. It was designed, in the very text of it, it says that this is not supposed to go to abortion providers, but the Democrats just did a bit of legalese and daring do, and basically said, well, inside every Planned Parenthood building are 2 clinics. There's the abortion clinic, and there's the Title X clinic. And ne'er the twain shall meet, of course, and even though the 2 are within the same 4 walls and have the same employees and the same people doing both, and they refer back and forth to each other because it's literally in the same building, no, it's fine for Planned Parenthood to get Title X money because it's not an abortion provider. It's their Title X clinic.
John, for our friends who maybe are listening that might be either pro-choice or at least they are skeptical of what's the big deal, what's wrong with this, I ask you, how would you feel if every church decided to say, hey, within our church walls, we have a tax-deductible religious organization
501c3
and a political action committee.
Yeah, and a Republican Party headquarters.
It just happens that our pastor, when he walks off the stage to the left and then walks around the back of the building, comes on and enters stage right, hey, he can now campaign for any candidate he wants to. It just so happens.
Yeah, it's just within the same 4 walls of our church.
And it also happens to be literally within the same 2 hours on Sunday morning that everyone's there.
Right.
It's, I mean...
2 hours, geez.
Well,
you guys have stamina. All right, anyway. It's just some friendly Catholic Protestant banter.
Right.
All right. Yeah, if one of our priests tried to preach for more than 20 minutes, there would be an absolute riot.
I mean, in totality. 2
All
hours.
right, anyway. So, So President Trump succeeds in changing the Title X program, changing the qualifications for it. Planned Parenthood's going to lose out on the Title X money. Planned Parenthood gets about $60 million a year on Title X. Good job, President Trump. Well, we're immediately starting the process now that the Biden administration is in charge of reinstating the old Title X rules so that Planned Parenthood can get the money. But perhaps even more infuriatingly than that, COVID hits, the Paycheck Protection Plan comes into effect. And the Paycheck Protection Plan is specifically, the law authorizing it, is specifically drafted by members of Congress to ensure that Planned Parenthood isn't eligible. That was like a major sticking point. It was a key part of the debate. Senator Rubio was kind of key in this whole thing, specifically helped draft the law so that Planned Parenthood would not qualify. That was a key point of debate, a point of debate that the Democrats lost and the Republicans won. That was in it, okay? That was the Paycheck Protection Plan. No money for abortion providers. Well, Planned Parenthood affiliates throughout the country somehow got $81 million in SBA loans through the Paycheck Protection Plan. And now the horse is out of the barn. And now that they're wanting to get it all forgiven under the Biden administration, it's all hunky-dory. There's going to be no investigations into why Planned Parenthood got this money that they were not authorized to get. So we deprive Planned Parenthood of $60 million in Title X funding, but then proceed to give them $80 million in PPP money. Then comes this Biden budget, okay? As I said, Planned Parenthood already gets a lot of money from Medicaid, from the federal Medicaid program. It's something like $450 million a year. That's only for their non-abortion services. Okay? Now, money is fungible. Jonathan, if you've got $20 in your pocket, and I say, Jonathan, I'm going to give you this $20 bill, but you can't use it to go to the movies. And you say, I won't do it, Johnny. I will keep this $20 bill.
This $20 bill.
This $20 bill I will not spend at the movies. But boy, howdy, am I going to go see, Thor 8 with this other with this $20 bill that was already in my pocket that is now freed up for use at the movies because you gave me this original $20.
I was going to have to use this $20 bill in my left pocket to buy groceries for my wife and kids at home.
Right.
But now
I can use it for Thor 8.
That's right.
There you go. I'm exaggerating, folks. I'm pretty sure we're only up to like 7 Thor movies.
Yes.
All right. So money is kind of fungible anyway. However, if you get rid of this wall of separation, this barrier that the federal government is not going to reimburse Planned Parenthood for their actual abortion services, well, then guess what? What this means is that Planned Parenthood is going to get a lot more money, okay? Because what is their single biggest revenue driver out of all the services they do? It's abortion. So do you want to see Planned Parenthood's federal funding skyrocket? I mean, I don't know how much it's going to skyrocket, but I'm sure someone can do the work on the breakdown of what Planned Parenthood revenue is from abortions versus other stuff. But I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to see Planned Parenthood is going to be getting over $500 million from the federal government. This is going to be a massive increase in funding to Planned Parenthood. It's going to be a massive increase, a historic increase in abortion funding. It's going to be absolutely historically bad. So that's my great fear with all of this, is that if this budget passes, and I don't know if Republicans have the means to do it. Okay, the last big spending bill that the Biden administration passed, one of their COVID relief bills, didn't have any Hyde Amendment protection because Republicans don't have a majority in the Senate to insist on it. So we will see with this Biden budget. Hopefully the Republicans can fight enough. They can get Joe Manchin on board. Joe Manchin, who supports the Hyde Amendment, allegedly. But we will see. All right, when we return, we're going to talk with Jonathan a bit more about our friends, Dr. Francis Collins and Dr. Anthony Fauci, about why we want to catapult them into the sun. That's next on Right to Life Radio. Phil Spector here on Right to Life Radio. How much do you know? Right to Life Radio, bringing you the Phil Spector wall of sound. See, this music is so good, I'm willing to play it in spite of the fact that the man who produced it was a convicted murderer. Right to Life Radio. Right to Life Radio. Thank you so much for tuning in. All right. Listen, folks, Phil Spector music is really good. I'm not going to apologize for playing. All right. Now, let's talk about problematic. Speaking of people who are problematic, what a segue. Speaking of people problematic, Jonathan, we have been on top of this from the get-go. We knew that Francis Collins was no good from the start.
John, I have to give you some personal credit here because two people that I deeply respect and that I appreciate, Dr. Russell Moore and Hugh Hewitt, both did interviews with on their various shows. They did interviews with Dr. Francis Collins and Dr. Anthony Fauci over the last year, and they made it seem like, hey, these are two just nice public servants. You know, Dr. Fauci, I believe, Catholic. Dr. Collins,
Catholic.
Dr. Collins, I think, is Presbyterian, maybe.
Whatever.
And I remember thinking, well, golly, you know, I know John started complaining about these guys, or not Fauci, but about Dr. Collins all the way back.
Definitely Collins. It took me a while with Fauci, but yeah.
All the way back, I think, in 2017 or 2018. You were complaining about Dr. Collins. And I was thinking, well, come on. I mean, it can't be that bad. I mean, look at how respected he is in the community and all these great interviews he does with leading luminaries of the faith community.
So, for those who don't know, Dr. Francis Collins is the head of the National Institutes of Health. One of his underlings is Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's the director of NIAID, which is sort of underneath the National Institutes of Health. What those two entities do is help fund research. They fund various kinds of scientific research to examine various kinds of health problems. Dr. Fauci is involved with epidemiology and infectious diseases and things like that. And they are under a little bit of hot water because it seems as though they helped fund a grant that promoted a sub-grant in that was some of that money was used at this place called the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which happens to be a place that studies bat coronaviruses, which happens to be across the street from the wet market that people say allegedly is where coronavirus started. And definitely it could not have started from this lab where they were doing what's called gain of function research on coronaviruses, which is basically where you tinker with coronaviruses to make them more deadly so that you can come up with treatments for them. Definitely there's no way that federal funding authorized under these two men who lobbied for this precise kind of research in spite of the fact that there are federal regulations against it. In spite of all, so these two guys certainly would have nothing to. There's no self-interest if these two guys are saying, well, there's no way that this could have come from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Well, there is a way it could have come from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and if it did come from that, and it did come from gain-of-function research, which they were advocating for, then maybe those two guys have something to answer for. In addition to that, though, that's neither here nor there. That's not really a topic of conversation for Right to Life Radio. I'm just mentioning that as helpful, interesting background. Dr. Collins and Dr. Fauci are big fat pro-choicers, and they have been from the get-go, and for some reason they've snookered the faith community into thinking that these are just great guys. Dr. Collins was appointed by Barack Obama, not Donald Trump. Donald Trump kept him in his job, never fired him, should have fired him, in spite of the fact that this guy is the swamp, is the definition of the swamp, a career official of the federal government who promotes left-wing things, in spite of the fact he was constantly fighting against Trump policies to cut off federal funding for various kinds of pro-choice research. So Dr. Collins was appointed by Barack Obama precisely because he supported embryo-destructive stem cell research, which has proven to be a complete dead end and a total waste of time and money and human life. And Dr. Fauci, now that President Biden's in office, has gone on fulsomely saying, oh, it's so wonderful that the Mexico City policy is back in force. Oh, well, you know, I know that National Institutes of Health are promoting research trying to graft human fetal tissue onto rats to form human rat chimeras in monstrous abuses of human dignity using fetal tissue from aborted children for this. But, as long as there's proper oversight, it's fine. Dr. Fauci, totally okay with it. Totally fine with promoting it. In short, I want to load both of these guys into a cannon and shoot it at the sun. I'm tired of both of them. I wish President Trump had fired every single employee of the federal government who was pro-choice, who had any ability to stymie his efforts. He didn't. It was the single worst pro-life mistake that President Trump made, was keeping Francis Collins and apparently Anthony Fauci in office. They both should have been fired on January 20th, 2017. That'll do it for Right to Life Radio. I'm mad. You're mad. We're all mad. Get out of here, Fauci.
Enjoy that summer win.
Enjoy the summer win. We'll see you next week. See you later.